Today, using this beautiful compass posted on Reddit by user Slice of Swag, I'm going to explain all the major political ideologies that have been developed throughout history. This video will be divided in 4 parts for the 4 sections of the compass. Today, we're starting with possibly the most controversial sector of political ideology, hated and loved by many, the Red Corner. Hive mind collectivism. Starting strong here, huh? So, simply put, hive mind collectivism is a model where society would operate like an ant colony. Everyone would act in benefit of the colony, and society as a whole would be united by a collective train of thought. In this model, there would be no government. There would just be the collective. And every collective action would be a sum of the various individual wills. You could consider this the extremely late-stage communism, where all the members of society have abandoned their individuality and have united in one collective unit that progresses for its own benefit. Monarcho-communism. This is a system where you have a communist state under a monarchic rule. There are actually some examples in history where this has happened, like the island of Grenada, a communist state that existed between 1979 and 1983 and that recognized Queen Elizabeth II as head of state and had a bishop as a ruler. This strange country had many problems and lasted until Uncle Sam knocked on the door to spread some freedom on the territory, launching a very hard-fought invasion. Although this is not a very good example, you can imagine monarcho-communism as a communist state with a hereditary leader, something like North Korea today. Neo-Bolshevism. This refers to many systems implemented in some post-Soviet states consisting of a continuation of the early Soviet policymaking, mainly under Stalin. It can also refer to the ideological nostalgia for the Bolshevik era in the Soviet Union that some people hold today. Bourgeois socialism. Bourgeois socialism refers to the system that aims to preserve the current social and political structure while trying to remediate inequalities by the making of policies and redistribution of taxes, taxing the rich to give to the poor. I wonder where that idea came from. This system has been heavily criticized by both Karl Marx and liberal authors as being a failure in all senses. It's the predominant political system in Europe today, so my man did have a point. Ingsoc. English socialism, or Ingsoc, is the political system portrayed in the book 1984 by George Orwell. It depicts an all-powerful government that manipulates reality and the thought of its citizens at will. This government has created its own language, its own hierarchy, and its own family structure inside the party. In Ingsoc, it's not unusual to accuse a family member of treason so that they can be executed, and for that family member to feel proud of you for that action. You're not permitted to have pleasure during sex or free time without surveillance. I know it sounds like getting married, right? Under Ingsoc, you aren't allowed to think anything the party doesn't want you to think, and they actually provide you with mental tricks to suppress any thought that doesn't go with the party line. 1984 is a phenomenal work of fiction, and I highly recommend getting your hands on a copy of this wonderful book. Khmer nationalism. This ideology developed in Cambodia in response to French colonialism. It focused on the exaltation of Khmer race and Cambodian nationalism. It also mixed with communism and Buddhist philosophies, culminating in the creation of the Cambodian People's Party that took over the country, a similar process of what happened in Vietnam. Hojiism. Hojiism can be called many different names, but in essence, it's the ideology defending that the only true Marxist experiences were the Soviet Union until the end of Stalin's rule and Albania under Hoxha. This ideology has a strong Marxist-Leninist background as well as a strong self-sufficient economic planification and anti-revisionism. National Bolshevism. This was a movement developed in Germany before the Nazi rule that mixed ultra-nationalist and white supremacist ideas with communist ones. It never had real repercussions, but it still exists in some parts of Russia. Maoism. This was the system developed by Mao Zedong in China when he ruled. He changed the definition of the working class to focus on the farmers, which were the majority of workers in China at the time, and adapted Marxism to the conditions of China. Some argue Maoism is the natural progression to Marxism-Leninism, while others believe it's a corrupt and poorly made communist system. Juche, also known as Kim Il-sungism, is the system of North Korea today. It's defined by extreme exaltation of the leader, elevating it to a godlike figure. It's also highly militaristic and nationalist, as well as anti-American. Third position. Third position is not a well-defined position, but a term that refers to movements that refuse binary classifications like right-left or capitalism-communism. It can be oriented in different directions, some more social, patriotic, or authoritarian. Xi Jinping thought. It consists of a 14-point policy made by the current leader of China. It boils down to total control of the Communist Party over China and its military, and following Chinese socialism for the benefit of the people. It is said in Beijing that under Xi Jinping, China will progress to socialism, but many don't believe they'll be able to step away from the aggressive capitalism they have today. Eco-fascism. Basically, you have your traditional fascism that incorporates radical ecology into its ideology through a foundational argument like, the white man and nature were created together. I also don't know what you're doing here, buddy. National syndicalism. This movement was developed in fascist Spain, and it defends conjunct trade unions of workers and businesses. Contrary to liberalism, it defends a unique partyless syndical state into which all citizens can exert democracy-breaking, useless ideological currents associated with the typical political system. It also shouldn't even be in this section of the compass, as these are the guys that fought against the communists in the Spanish Civil War. Castroism. It refers to the current political system developed in Cuba. It defines itself as communist and anti-imperialist. It also differs a lot from typical communist ideas in that it doesn't reject Christianity. And as a large portion of Cuba's population is Christian, it embraces Christian values as far as saying that Jesus was a communist. Strasserism. Strasserism was a socialist ideology developed inside the Nazi Party by Otto Strasser. It aimed to implement a socialist economy through what he called German socialism. Strasserism also focused a lot on the concept of the farmer, arguing that it is the baseline model for a human being and that we should all return to that state. Mugabeism. This ideology, developed by President of Zimbabwe Robert Mugabe, was a left nationalist and anti-colonialist breed of communism. His party's ideology was very populist and revisionist. He developed multi-class positions and heavily relied on victimization of the Africans. He actually was very opportunistic and changed its position many times about a lot of subjects. Arab socialism. When Pan-Arabism and Marxism meet, you get Arab socialism. This ideology defends the union of all Arab states into a socialist unified nation. It differs from traditional Marxism in the defense of private property and hereditary rights, which are traditional Islamic concepts, and while it aims to seize the means of production, it adapts the communist ideology to the strong Muslim culture. Titoism. This was the system developed by Yugoslavian leader Josip Tito. Its main characteristic was the development of socialism according to each country's conditions, other than following another more powerful state. That made him very unpopular in the Soviet Union that wanted to exert influence on the communist states at the time. Neo-Marxism. While Marx focused heavily on the flawed competitive nature of capitalism, neo-Marxism develops much later in the 70s and 80s and recognizes that massive accumulations of capital have developed monopolies that have massive amounts of control and have the ability to cooperate between each other, creating lobbies and exerting political influence. Neo-Marxism ideology goes against that. Fully automated luxury communism. This is the name of a book by Aaron Bastany, where he develops the idea that following the natural progression of technology, in the future, everything will be automated and there will be plenty of resources so that everyone can live an accommodated life. So there will be no need for competition and poverty will be non-existent. This concept was recently brought up to the mainstream following the AI hype. Leninism. Leninism was developed during the Russian Revolution by Vladimir Lenin and his associates. It had many theoretical and ideological contributions to Marxism, and it adapted the idea to the Russian conditions at the time. His most important contribution was the distinction between socialism and communism, the first being the dictatorship of the proletariat and the latter being a truly classless society. Ho Chi Minh thought, "This is the official ideology of the Vietnam Communist Party still ruling. It is very similar to Chinese socialism in that they want to maintain a Communist Party structure until the industry develops to the point where they transition to socialism. The main differences are that it's adapted to the conditions of Vietnam and that it has some influence of Confucianism in the appreciation of personal development." Agrarian socialism. Agrarian socialism focuses on the redistribution of the land into collectivized villages. This movement focuses on decentralization and common ownership of the land by its workers. It's also very traditionalistic and local focused. Jacobinism. These were the guys responsible for this. Great job, by the way. This ideology is very old and was developed from the work of Rousseau. They defended the idea of the people having sovereignty over the state and developed the concept of general will, that is, not the sum of any particular will, but what defends the general well-being. Monarcho-socialism. So monarcho-socialists defend a socialist government under a monarchic head of state. It doesn't make much sense, but some tend to end up here by living in a monarchy and being left-wing oriented. Chauvism. Chauvism is the current political system in Venezuela. They defend heavy state intervention into economic matters with measures like price controls and economic planification. While they don't deny the existence of the market, they defend the idea of a socialist market, regulated by a revolutionary government. I wonder how that's going. Longism. This ideology gets its name from Huey Long, senator of Louisiana in the 1930s. The main idea behind Longism is pretty similar to a European social democracy, except he supported the use of authoritarian methods to achieve reforms. Ah, you gotta love a charismatic leader of the interwar period. Technocracy. A technocracy is a form of meritocratic government in which each charge is assigned in function of the knowledge an individual has in that particular field. A perfect technocracy would be a government formed by skilled scientists and logicians where each decision would be made following strict cause, effect, and pros and cons mechanisms. Deng Xiaoping theory. Under this ruler, China experienced major changes in its foreign policy. Deng Xiaoping claimed he didn't reject Marxism or Maoism, but was just adapting to the conditions the country was going through. Under this ideology, the CCP was consolidated as an unbreakable communist party. But on the economic front, China opened up to capitalism to gain stability and not lose control like had happened in many communist countries. Paternalistic conservatism. This ideology defends that societies develop organically and that each individual has a responsibility for their fellow citizens. This idea likely develops from Christianity and gets pushed further into a more political train of thought. In the economic front, it tends to be conservative, so right-winged, so get out of here. Fully automated, gay space luxury communism. So, this is a variation of a fully automated luxury communism that was developed on internet forums. In this case, society would have no concept of sexual orientation whatsoever, so in other words, everyone would be gay. Guevarism. Good old Che Guevara. Guevarism is a guerrilla ideology that defends a constant revolution through guerrilla military tactics. The three principles of this ideology are that the people can win with proper organization against a nation's army, that the conditions that make a revolution possible can be put in place by the popular forces, and that the popular forces always have an advantage in a non-urban setting. Socialist transhumanism. This philosophy was developed in Soviet Russia, and it defends that the achievement of a communist society and the progress of humanity into a superior technological society are complementary goals. Conservative socialism. This is actually a pretty interesting one. So, Conservative socialism defends that capitalism always will lead to degeneracy and mindless consumerism, which totally breaks apart traditional values and relationships. Conservative socialists believe that socializing means of production is the only way to maintain traditional values, rendering useless the mind-breaking individualism of capitalist societies. Social gospel. Social gospel is a Protestant, liberal, American ideology that defends Christian values in the political spectrum. It mainly centers around the Christian fundamentals of equality and social justice. Girondinism. This was one of the Jacobin factions. Remember the Jacobins? Anyway, they took part in the assembly after the French Revolution and strongly defended a stop in the down spiral of it. The Girondins strongly opposed the Montagnards, famous for their guillotine purges. It's safe to say they didn't keep their heads for very long. Economic humanitarianism. This economic system defends that capitalism is the optimal way for industry to progress and that, while automation of jobs is a problem, less mature industries will always emerge, creating new jobs to compensate for more developed and automated sectors. The socialist ideas of this ideology come in the scenario that not enough jobs would be created. In that case, universal basic income would be introduced so people can live a good life without working a day in their lives. This system comes as a complement of geniocracy, the government of the smartest. Neo-corporatism. This is a bit long and boring to explain, so in a nutshell, it's these guys. Trade unions financed by the state that totally defend workers' rights and not the interests of the government who pays them, and employers' unions who totally care for regulations and welfare of the citizens. Another example of a great idea that will never work. Posadism. Good old aliens. You gotta love them, right? When Argentinian Trotskyist J. Posadas smoked a fat joint, he decided to marry UFOlogy and communism, giving birth to Posadism. The general idea is that aliens live in complex communist societies and that the only way for interplanetary expansion is in a communist model. It's a cool theory, but very simplistic and impossible to prove. Trotskyism. Very good man, Trotsky, you know. He managed to escape Stalin and the SVR, the Soviet KGB, set up shop in Mexico, and even found a woman for himself. That is, until an ice axe found a way into his head. So anyway, Leon Trotsky defended the idea of the permanent revolution that would take place internationally, that way establishing its permanence. He also defended the use of daily problems of the people to incite revolutions with a hidden socialist agenda. What a great leader he was, lying to the people to obtain power. Austro-Marxism. Developed in Austria-Hungary in the interwar period, Austro-Marxism is a revisionist movement that aimed to marry the social democratic politics with a revolutionary communist ideology. The ideology was highly anti-authoritarian and also pushed nationalism as a class movement. Menshevism. The Mensheviks were the moderate faction in opposition to the Bolsheviks in the Soviet Union. They didn't consolidate as an ideological current, but mainly they defended the intellectualization of the working class, the development of capitalism before developing socialism, and the defense of good morals, which is why they failed to take strong action as a movement. Social ecology. This philosophical theory, developed by American Murray Bookchin, was a precursor to many ecological movements we have today. The main idea was a complex utopian concept of human evolution where he presented nature and society as a thinking entity that we are part of, and that has led to the development of us over time. The idea is quite similar to the Gaia theory of James Lovelock, but it incorporates urban planning and anarchist socialist ideas. Futurism. Futurism developed as an artistic movement and later turned political. It strongly defends progress almost without limits. Futurists believe in heavy industrialization, violent action, and individualism. They strongly reject anything traditional or of the past, focusing thought on new ways of thinking and human pleasures. Also, it totally does not belong here. 3 principles of the people. Developed in 19th century China, The Three Principles of the People is a political philosophy that defends nationalism or national independence, democracy by the separation of the political power and the executive power, and welfare against the inequalities of capitalism. It's the main ideology of one of the principal political forces in Taiwan and former enemy of China's Communist Party in the Civil War, the Kuomintang. Christian democracy. Although Christian democracy was a different thing back then, nowadays it has incorporated liberal and modern ideas to appeal to a mass audience, so it's basically these guys, but a bit on the left. Communalism. A communist society is one where private property is completely erased, so everything is from the community, similar to how the Amish community lives nowadays. The problem of communism is when it's applied at a large scale, it gets out of control and it just goes against human nature. Orthodox Marxism. This current of Marxism was developed in Germany before the First World War, a period of intense ideological fighting inside communist parties. Orthodox Marxism aimed to be as true as possible to the original texts by Marx and Engels and proposed a revolutionary development of socialism. Social populism. It's pretty self-explanatory. Left-wing ideology focused on the largest social group possible. Distributism. It was based on the Catholic Church social doctrine and, as the name says, it aims to distribute wealth amongst the people. As opposed to communism, it doesn't defend the idea of a state controlling the means of production, but rather the actual workers doing so. Trade unionism. This isn't as much an ideology as it is a way of organizing people. Trade unions aim to gather a large group of workers from a particular sector and organize them to defend certain things. Through action in trade unions, many workers of other sectors join, making the union bigger. Corporate solidarism. Corporate solidarism is a representative ideology that aims to create a social fabric of solidarity that will be enough to care for everyone that needs help. It is anti-liberal and anti-communist. And we're done. If you've reached this far into the video, I really appreciate you. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss Part 2.